I'm Lisa Smith. This week is Pretty Well's 3rd anniversary. I cannot believe it's been 3 years. I want to start out today by thanking you for all of your support, all of your kind words, comments, and feedback. I appreciate you more than you know, and you mean the world to me. Today I'm doing something special. As we wrap up our 3rd season and head into the start of our 4th season, today I'm going to be sharing with you a talk I gave recently to practitioners on the role of the gut and nervous system in optimizing hormones. This conversation is full of science-backed pearls that we don't hear in our day-to-day. It is filled with great biohacks and valuable pieces of information you can take away today that can make a significant change on your hormonal health. What I unpack in this conversation are little known effects that our gut have on our hormone health. There's a part of your gut referred to as the estrobolome, and those are the bacteria that help to balance your estrogen. There are other specific factors in your gut that are related to driving inflammation and reducing inflammation. All of these are things that can transform your life. If you have been dealing with hormonal frustrations, accelerated aging, fatigue, weight gain, things that you're saying, I have not done anything differently, but these are changing in my life and I don't know why, you will find out answers today that will blow your mind. So without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. I can't wait to hear from you what you've learned and what you took away from today's episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the balance in the relationship between our hormones and our overall gut health. In practice, it's common knowledge that our hormones affect our gut. For instance, estrogen can slow down our gut motility. It can slow down our digestion if the estrogen is out of balance. There are many other effects that our hormones have on our gut health, but there aren't a lot of people talking about the effects that specific bacteria in our gut have on our hormonal well-being. So today we're going to be talking about that relationship. Now, my clinical experience has been early on, before I knew the role of gut health in hormonal balancing, as so many other practitioners would address hormonal imbalances from a glandular and hormone level standpoint. And I would find that people would improve, but they would seem to kind of relapse. Their symptoms would get better and then something would happen and they would start to flare up again. And what I found was that these patients didn't experience full symptomatic resolution until we truly dug deep and addressed gut health. And that became a game changer, which has now led to why I have the specialty that I do. Let's talk about what the research says. A 2021 study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that the gut microbiome, so our gut makeup, all the bacteria, directly impacts both reproductive health and metabolic endocrine function. So again, the gut health, the gut microbiome, directly impacts our hormones. The key takeaway from that study was that hormonal balance isn't just about the glands and the reproductive organs, but that our gut plays an essential role in hormone metabolism, detoxification, and receptor sensitivity. Now let's talk about how does the gut do that. There are some key ways we're going to talk about today how the gut does that. Many of us are aware that hormones can influence the gut, right? We know that estrogen influences gut motility. We know that cortisol has an effect on microbiome diversity. So let's just unpack that a little bit. That's just a 25-cent word that refers to the makeup, the ecosystem of our gut. So when you think of our gut, I like to explain it this way. It's very simplified. Of course, it's much more complex than this, but it gives a great image of what we're talking about. With the microbiome, I like to say we have a good army and we have a bad army. It's the good beneficial bacteria, and then bacteria that is either not good, it can be pathogenic, or it can just be commensal, meaning it lives there normally, but when it overgrows, it can become a problem. So let's just simplify it to the good guys and the bad guys. And what we want to do is we want to increase that diversity, because when we increase the diversity, it's as if we're increasing the diversity of our good army. We're getting more and different types. And as we do that, it crowds out the pathogenic bacteria. It crowds out the commensal or normal bacteria that can become opportunistic. So that's what we want. We want microbial diversity. Elevated cortisol over time will negatively impact that diversity. And we're going to talk about why that even matters. It's not just hormones influencing gut health. It's not just a one-way street. It goes both ways. The gut doesn't just respond to hormones. It actively metabolizes hormones. It regulates hormones, and it detoxifies or eliminates them. So when our gut health is compromised, then that's when we start to see this negative cycle of gut health being compromised and then hormonal imbalances continuing to stay on despite our efforts. So the first way that the gut influences our hormones is through a part of that diversity, a part of those bacteria called the estrobolome. And the estrobolome are specific good bacteria in our gut that play a role in our estrogen balance. And here's how. Did you know that your gut actually controls your estrogen levels? This estrobolome, this collection of good bacteria, they detoxify and they regulate the circulating estrogen. So what happens is, if your gut bacteria is imbalanced, that's called dysbiosis. If you have gut dysbiosis, it just means that your gut bacteria is not optimal. Then we begin to make more of an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. Beta-glucuronidase, this is really cool what it does. So when we have estrogen that needs to be eliminated, excreted from our body, circulating estrogen, we're done with it, we're making new, we're getting rid of the old. What the body does is in the liver, it packs it, think of it like a pickup truck or a garbage truck. But one of the things it does is it packs it with the glucuronic acid. So it's called glucuronidation. So it packages it. Picture estrogen now riding in the back of a pickup truck or estrogen riding in the back of a garbage truck. And they're connected. They are connected completely together. Well, high levels of beta-glucuronidase cleave that estrogen off of its carrier. And now estrogen, the carrier was going to carry the estrogen right through the bile and out in feces and urine. So the whole meaning of the truck is to carry it out of the body. But elevated levels of beta-glucuronidase cleave that right off, and then estrogen recycles. And what that ends up contributing to is estrogen dominance. So you can see where the gut plays a key role in estrogen dominance. And when we have estrogen dominance, we see symptoms such as bloating, weight gain. You know, those hormonal symptoms that they're just so frustrating. We're not doing anything different. We're doing all the right things, but we're getting bloating, weight gain, fatigue, heavy periods, PMS, sometimes fibroids, significant perimenopause issues, problems, and even estrogen dominance is related to estrogen cancer. So the takeaway and the clinical implication of that is, if we're only looking at the ovaries and estrogen-related problems in estrogen dominance, then we're missing half of the story. We've got to start by looking at the gut and the levels of beta-glucuronidase. We can do that with the stool test, and when those levels are elevated, we know that there's too much circulating estrogen. And it's a pretty simple fix. We're going to talk about some of the fixes at the end, but it's an important piece of information for us to know. That's the first way the gut impacts hormones. The second way that the gut impacts hormones is that our gut produce metabolites. Our gut bacteria produce metabolites. Some of the good metabolites are called short-chain fatty acids. So we have that good army. And what the good army does is, once it breaks down its food, so what it needs to survive, then it produces these short-chain fatty acids. Let's take a step backward. In the gut, we've got that good army and the bad army, we'll call it. The good army, those are simply known as probiotics. Those are the things about when we want to eat more yogurt, or maybe have a little kombucha or some sauerkraut or kimchi because we're trying to improve our gut health, or we take a probiotic supplement. That's what the good bacteria are in our gut. They're probiotics. how do you keep an army alive? You feed it, right? So what do you feed it? Well, you feed it prebiotic fibers. So the way I remember it is pre and feed. I use that rhyme as a little mental exercise to remember. Prebiotics means that's what the food is, or the feed for probiotics. Prebiotics we can get through a supplement, but they're really easy to get through our diet. And we're going to talk about that as we talk about the solutions too at the end. How do we get more prebiotics? In general, it's getting more fiber into your diet, but there are some specific ones that are extremely helpful for producing more of these short-chain fatty acids. And you may be asking yourself, why is that important? Who cares about short-chain fatty acids? Well, here's why it's important, because short-chain fatty acids are your superpower for reducing chronic inflammation. Very important from an inflammation standpoint. They also improve our insulin sensitivity. So they help us in terms of keeping our blood sugar balanced. And they've been shown to even enhance ovarian function, especially in PCOS patients. So short-chain fatty acids are extremely important. They're starting to get more press. They're starting to become more of something that you hear people talking about in the holistic health world, in the functional medicine world. And specifically, a short-chain fatty acid that probably is getting the most press is butyrate. There's butyrate, there's acetate, and there's propionate. But we really see a lot of supplements becoming more popular right now that help butyrate production. And a lot of those are these fibers that I'm talking about. I'm going to help you understand how easy it is to add into your diet these fibers that help you to feed or grow your good army. But the key takeaway about that is if you have a patient and they struggle with prediabetes, insulin resistance, maybe even type 2 diabetes, and if they've been doing things very consistently and they feel like they're doing everything right and they're not making progress, the next step it's very important to look at is what's going on with their butyrate production in their gut. Again, that's a simple gut test. A lot of these things are all on the same gut test, which makes it even more exciting because you get all the information from one test. So those are the first two ways that the gut influences hormonal balance. The third way is kind of like a stealth, a hidden insult to our gut that also causes significant problems with our hormones. And that's called endotoxemia. We all have, remember the bad army I talked about. Well, the bad army is all different kinds of bacteria that we want to keep under control. And some of those bacteria are gram-negative bacteria. On the outer membrane of certain gram-negative bacteria, we find something called LPS, or lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides are also known as endotoxins, right? Endo, inside of us, toxins. Those toxins are absolutely implicated and guilty of causing chronic systemic inflammation. It could be low-grade inflammation, it could be severe inflammation, but they play a key role in this chronic inflammation. And what happens with our gut when our gut becomes hyperpermeable, also known as leaky gut, when that starts to take place in someone, these gram-negative bacteria with the LPS comes off of the bacteria, gets into our bloodstream, leaches into our bloodstream, and now begins to wreak havoc on our whole body, on our inflammation levels, on our hormones, on our weight, you name it. Chronic inflammation as the root of all disease, right? The important thing about this to know is this isn't something people look for a lot, this LPS, these lipopolysaccharides, but they are connected to different kinds of disorders such as estrogen dominance, insulin resistance, and of course, as I said, inflammation. Now, let's just do a little backtrack. What is leaky gut? We hear about it. It's that term is thrown around a good bit, but what is it? If you picture your digestive tract as one hose from your mouth to your butt, don't worry about the organs, it's just one hose. And imagine springtime's coming. You're going to Home Depot or Lowe's and you're going to buy a brand new hose because you're going to start your garden and you're so excited. You splurge and you spend a little bit extra. And you get this great new hose. You hook it up to your spigot. You go to bed that night. But what you didn't know overnight is some bratty little neighbor kid came over and he pricked holes all through your brand new hose. So when you turn it on tomorrow, it's going to spring leaks all over like a sprinkler instead of just getting water from the spigot to the nozzle. That's kind of what leaky gut is. You have these little, think of them like pinpricks all through your small intestines so that before your food is adequately broken down, it would normally diffuse. So the food would get broken down in your nutrients, but now you have these little pinpricks throughout your gut, and it's very common. And so bigger molecules get through that are not supposed to get out of the GI tract. And they do. And they cause not only inflammation, like the LPS that gets out, the endotoxins, but other things get through too. So your body recognizes those as a threat. That's a key contributor to food sensitivities, because if, say, you eat a lot of something, it could even be something very healthy. It could be chicken, rice, vegetables. But say you eat a lot of rice, it could be that because now that leaky gut is allowing molecules through that aren't ready to go into your bloodstream, your immune system sees that as a threat and mounts a response against that. So now rice becomes a problem. Every time you eat rice, you're like, I never had a problem with rice before. Well, that's how leaky gut works, and that's how it contributes to food sensitivities, but that's also how it contributes to hormonal imbalance. So if you find that someone has metabolic issues, and again, they're doing all the right things, this is something we want to look for. We want to look for gut dysbiosis, which means that your microbiome is unbalanced. We want to look for leaky gut, and we want to look for this endotoxemia. So those are three of the main ways how the gut influences our sex hormones. I want to talk about how the gut influences our thyroid hormones and then how stress is involved with all of it. So we have the gut thyroid hormone axis. It kind of blows my mind, but 20% of your thyroid hormone, T4, which you make the bulk of, and then we convert it to active T3, 20% of that conversion happens in your gut. So you can see if your gut isn't working properly, then thyroid hormone conversion can become impaired and not work right. We see this sometimes when we have labs that don't quite line up. We see that the TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, that's coming from our brain to tell our thyroid make more hormone, that may look normal, but we'll see that the T3 levels, the active thyroid, is low. And T4 might be just fine. So it looks a little confusing, like what's going on? These enzymes we make in the gut, they have a lot to do with all this stuff. We make an enzyme called deiodinase. It's kind of a mouthful. And deiodinase enzyme, the function of that is to help T4 convert to T3. Well, when you have gut dysbiosis, then that enzyme doesn't work properly anymore. And when it doesn't, that's where that conversion starts to fall down. The other thing that leaky gut is linked to is something called zonulin production. Zonulin is a protein we make in our gut cells. So remember that hose I was talking about? Well, the reason that hose is semi-permeable and it lets the right things out, but it keeps the wrong things in, that zonulin lives in what's called the tight junctions. The tight junctions are very, very tight. And zonulin starts to make those junctions more like a gap. And that's where leaky gut begins. So certain things cause zonulin production to increase. And as that increases, then it causes this leaky gut, which is behind what I talked about earlier with the endotoxemia, and now also related to thyroid problems, especially thyroid autoimmunity. So we tend to see higher zonulin production in Hashimoto's and Graves' disease. There's a direct link and other autoimmune conditions as well. So this leaky gut becomes one of the main factors that contributes to autoimmune conditions and even to diabetes and to Alzheimer's, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Now, what causes zonulin production to increase? One of the things that can cause it to increase is gluten. What we want to look at with somebody who might fit this bill. They might have Hashimoto's or Graves', or they might have elevated thyroid antibodies. We want to do that same gut test. We'll look at zonulin production, and it will look at something called anti-gliadin. Gliadin is a component of gluten. And when we see that elevated, that anti-gliadin marker elevated, then we know that someone has a problem with gluten, even if they're not celiac. So we look at that as well to figure out what's going on. We very often see that link, that anti-gliadin and that zonulin, especially with Hashimoto's. So if they're on thyroid medication and some of their symptoms have improved, their blood work looks good, but they say, I still feel really tired, or I'm still cold all the time, or my skin's so dry, or I'm constipated, or any number of those symptoms, then again, we want to go back and make sure that we're ruling out, is gut function playing a hidden role in perpetuating these symptoms? So the key takeaway is that gut function can actually, if it's imbalanced, it can actually block thyroid function, thyroid activation, which can contribute to, of course, chronic fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, and all of those other symptoms that I had mentioned due to its role in the conversion of the inactive T4 to active T3. These are all key ways that the gut is working behind the scenes to wreak havoc it doesn't look like gut symptoms. None of these things look like gut symptoms. So often we start chasing those symptoms, and we always want to address symptoms, of course, but we're chasing those symptoms and we're missing some very important taproots when we're looking at root cause resolution. Now, what I believe is the taproot that is upstream from gut health is chronic stress. It's fascinating what happens when chronic stress changes us biochemically. So it's not just that it's uncomfortable and it keeps our heart racing. It's this chronically high cortisol disrupts our hormone production. And get this is why. One of the raw materials that's needed to make cortisol is pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is also a raw material for progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. When you or your patient is under chronic stress, we live now in a time that we're all under chronic stress. But if we're not dealing with it well, or if it's major life stress that just keeps going, then the body is choosing to prioritize cortisol production over sex hormone production. So our hormone levels start to drop. Now, if that happens to coincide at perimenopause, now it's crazy making. It's total chaos because we're already starting to see a drop off of these hormones and this hormone production. And then if the body is doing what's called a pregnenolone steal to take it and put it toward cortisol, now the symptoms get significantly worse. And this is when we start to see people really struggling with their hormones, especially, again, around perimenopause. This is when women really start to struggle. So what happens as these hormones start to drop off? Well, first of all, progesterone will drop off first, which inevitably leads to estrogen dominance initially. And estrogen dominance, a lot of times we think estrogen dominance is we just have these super sky high levels of estrogen. That's not necessarily what's happening. It could be, or it could simply be the estrogen and progesterone are supposed to be within this ratio. And it could just be that the progesterone drops so low that now the estrogen's higher in terms of the ratio. It's going to cause miserable symptoms. So what happens is we see lower progesterone with chronic stress and chronically elevated cortisol levels. Then we see some estrogen dominant symptoms. And then we see testosterone also start to drop off pretty significantly, a testosterone deficiency. When we see this, we do see things, again, like weight gain, exhaustion, irritability, dry skin. We see vaginal dryness, vaginal atrophy, just all those symptoms that are so difficult to deal with, especially when they all start hitting at once. If we're only focusing on hormonal replacement or meds or supplements or nutrition, then we're missing the upstream driver to all of this, which is stress and gut dysfunction. Another thing that high cortisol does is it contributes to leaky gut. So it's this vicious cycle. It not only contributes, high cortisol contributes to lower sex hormones, which contributes to hormonal chaos, but it also, on the other side of the circle, contributes to leaky gut, and they all exacerbate each other. The bottom line is, if we only address hormonal balancing from a hormonal standpoint, we're missing a bigger picture. We're very often going to find that the gut is playing a key role that's just kind of hiding under the surface. And once we start to deal with the hormonal imbalances from a hormonal level, but then also from a gut level, and then also from lifestyle measures that help us to deal with our stress, then we begin to see the needle move, and then we begin to see people's lives change and transform. So let's talk about how we fix it. What do we do? How do we optimize this gut health to make sure that our hormones are balanced and that we feel and our patients feel amazing? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to test. We want to assess and test. And I've given you the best labs for that. Number one is the GI map. The GI map is a stool test, and hands down, it's going to check the boxes on so many of these measures that I've mentioned today. It's going to look at beta-glucuronidase. Remember, that's the one that leads to estrogen dominance because it pulls the estrogen off of the truck. If that's elevated, there's a very simple fix. First of all, we remove xenoestrogens, things that are those fake estrogens, phthalates, parabens. You find those in heavily scented products. So you want to clean up your environment. We want to coach our patients to clean up their environments. So we want to get rid of things like synthetic candles. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of all candles. I have some favorites that I can share with you that are all natural and essential oil scented. We want to get rid of air fresheners like those plug-ins. We want to get rid of scented laundry detergent and scented fabric softener and dryer sheets. Those things that have heavy scents to them are endocrine disruptors. They mess our hormones up. So that's the low-hanging fruit. We get rid of that. The second thing we do for something like a beta-glucuronidase is there's a supplement for it. And that is called calcium D-glucarate. So calcium D-glucarate helps to balance the level of beta-glucuronidase in our gut so that we're not pulling the estrogen off of the pickup truck and we're leaving it on and it's getting eliminated. So the GI map not only looks at beta-glucuronidase, it looks at zonulin, it looks at anti-gliadin, it looks at your microbiome. So it's looking at the good bacteria, the not so good bacteria, the bacteria that can be pathogenic. And then it helps us to see, is there overgrowth? Is there dysbiosis? How do we help this person bring balance? So that's my number one test. A second test is the organic acids test. It's also amazing, and it looks at metabolites from our gut, and they work hand in hand. So together, they give us a really good picture of what's happening holistically in this person. And then, of course, the third test, which is excellent, one of my favorites, is the Dutch test. And that tests our sex hormones, progesterone, estradiol, estriol, testosterone, cortisol, other androgens, and other metabolites. Those three together are the trifecta. And they show us not only this beta-glucuronidase and zonulin, anti-gliadin, microbial diversity, but also that SCFA, the short-chain fatty acid production. Remember, that came from the prebiotic fibers, from the food that feeds the probiotics. So that's the first step. We figure out what's going on. We test, don't guess. The next thing we do is we identify and remove triggers. So if someone has known food sensitivities, we remove them. If someone eats a lot of processed foods are high in glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in Roundup. Again, this is low-hanging fruit. We take out the things that we know are damaging and inflammation producing, things like those processed foods, phthalates, parabens, and PFAs, which are forever chemicals, mycotoxins, gut infections. We look at those things and we begin to remove those so that we can bring down the inflammation. And then step 3 is to bring in steps that will heal the gut. So further reducing inflammatory foods, sugar, processed foods, ultra-processed foods, gluten, dairy for some people, seed oils are a big one. And so cleaning up the diet is huge for reducing inflammation. And then bringing in those prebiotic fibers and fermented foods, so prebiotics and probiotics. The fermented foods have the probiotics, and then the prebiotic foods, again, are the feed for the probiotics. So get this. It's so easy to get prebiotic foods in your diet. The foods that are highest in prebiotics are onions, leeks, garlic, bananas, apples, asparagus, artichokes, kiwi are really big in these fibers. As a matter of fact, if you have a patient who struggles with chronic constipation, 1 to 2 kiwi a day can be a game changer for people because it's getting those prebiotic fibers in. Chia seeds, these are all great ways to boost those prebiotics. Those are the first 2 steps in healing the gut. And then thirdly, there are very specific gut healing supplements. And I like the ones that have a combination, so someone's not on 5 things at once. There are combinations that have L-glutamine, which is fuel for your enterocytes, your gut cells. So it helps to heal and fuel those gut cells. So L-glutamine, zinc carnosine, marshmallow root, slippery elm, colostrum, these are all excellent. Some of the herbs I mentioned, marshmallow root and slippery elm, those are mucilaginous herbs, meaning they help the gut to make more mucus, healthy mucus, that will line it and keep it protected and safe. That's step 3, we heal the gut. And then finally, we need to balance the nervous system and activate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is that long nerve that runs from behind your head down through your body and touches all your organs down to your gut. The vagus nerve, the way we activate that, there's so many ways we can activate that. We can do it by humming, singing, spending time out in nature, walking, prayer, breath work, meditation, infrared sauna, and/or cold therapy. These all help to promote vagus nerve activation. And what that does is it switches us out of that fight or flight sympathetic response into the rest and digest parasympathetic response, which helps to begin to dismantle that vicious cycle. So we're addressing everything from a hormone standpoint, from a gut standpoint, from a nervous system standpoint. That's when we begin to see true transformation, true life change. And a couple other things that really help with that nervous function, adaptogens. Does anyone take ashwagandha? Ashwagandha is calming. The beauty about adaptogens is they adapt based on what you need. So ashwagandha might work differently in your body than it works in my body, than it works in someone else's body. But it works as we need it, which to me is incredible. Same with rhodiola. Holy basil. A great way to get holy basil is through tea. If you've ever seen that Tulsi tea, Tulsi at the grocery store or on Amazon, Tulsi tea has holy basil in it, and that's also an excellent adaptogen. And then finally, no talk is complete without talking about sleep. We've got to make sure that sleep is prioritized. That's how the body heals. That's how our nervous system calms down for an extended amount of time. Some key hacks for that are heart rate variability tracking, magnesium nightly. Magnesium is excellent for helping with sleep and the nervous system. And then having great evening routines, making sure that we're stopping blue lights and screens a couple hours before bed. And if we're not off them a couple hours before bed, ensuring that we switch that blue light to an amber light. You might already know this. I had to have my kids tell me because I didn't know this. But on your phone, there's a setting and it's called night mode. You can go into the setting called night mode and you can turn it on and set the time. So mine is set for, I think it might be 6 p.m. until 7 a.m. the next morning. So every night at 6 p.m., my phone switches from that bright blue light to a more muted night amber light. And it does that every single night from 6 until 7 a.m. the next morning. The blue light tells our brain waves it's time to stay awake and time to be activated. So switching helps to not keep activating our brain waves. It helps us to fall into a more restful sleep. Some final takeaways and clinical pearls for our conversation today. I'm sure you hear that gut health is an absolute non-negotiable when it comes to hormonal balance. And if you have a patient who has persistent hormonal dysfunction, or even yourself, so many of us have or do have dealt with hormonal imbalances, we need to evaluate and optimize the gut health first, or at least within that process. And the future of hormone therapy isn't just about bioidentical hormonal replacement or getting the right supplements or even the right adaptogens. Those things are necessary, but they're not the whole picture. So to get the whole picture, we also need to look at the gut and the stress response. Thank you for being here today. So that wraps up today. Please drop me a message and let me know how you liked today's anniversary episode. Let me know what you've tried new as a result of what you took away from today. If there's someone else you know who loves this kind of information, who would benefit from it, please share Pretty Well with them. It helps the algorithm get our show to more people. I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to season number 4 with you. I'll be back next week. Until then, stay pretty well. Bye.